So I am honored to introduce our summit's second keynote speaker, Dr. Janice Johnson Diaz, who you may know as the mother of Marley Diaz. Dr. Johnson Diaz is a tenured associate professor of sociology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where her research focuses on impoverished mothers and children. Her work on welfare to work organizations has appeared in the top-ranked policy periodical Journal of Public Administration Research and Theory. Dr. Janice has also been published in well-respected sociological and psychological journals such as Gender and Society and the American Journal of Community Psychology. She is president of the Grassroots Community Foundation, and if you have not done so, please, we'll put the information in the chat. Join her newsletter. I get the newsletter, and it's just filled with a lot of different things that you all need to know, which is a New Jersey-based training institute with a focus on public health and social action that she co-founded in 2011. This year, she published her first book, which you all were privileged to get with your registration, Parent Like It Matters, How to Raise Joyful, Change-Making Girls. It summarizes her life experiences and offers practical tips on how caregivers can raise children who are devoted to social justice. And you all know that that's what we're about, raising our children, giving our children a voice, and having them be alongside of us when we're working in this social justice work. So without any further ado, please help me in welcoming Dr. Diaz.
Hello, everybody. It is so good to be here with you. I know that this is a virtual space, and I promise at some point we'll be together, and then we'll really kind of like bogle to begin the event. So I am always delighted when people have to introduce me and all these polysyllabic words, but I always say to people, I navigate between polysyllabic words and profanity all the time. And language is ours to use. Thank you. I knew the earrings are a thing. So I want to get started, and I want to get started with our presentation. So believe me very clearly when I say this. I am going to talk for about 20 minutes, and I will say some things. Some will be non-provocative, maybe others will be provocative, but I want you to ask me questions and glean from me anything that you need in order to enhance your work, your life, or your thinking about Black girls and ways in which to enhance their equity. All right, so I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're going to get this party started. So let's do it. So the title of my conversation with you today is called Living at the Intersections, Being Black and Girl Are More Than Enough. And you will see here that I am obsessed with this conversation because on Gwen's Girls site, they say that they're transforming public systems to better support Black girls' ability to thrive, right? So when you think about public systems, sometimes people are thinking about roadways, they're thinking about government offices, et cetera. I think about public systems in two ways. I think about public systems as it relates to education and as it relates to family. Now, clearly, I also think about healthcare, but these two are what I want to focus on today. And I want to say to you something that people rarely say out loud. They know it, but they don't say it. And it is that public systems are value systems. And those values shape the way we interact. So the educational system has a set of values, and its values are to regulate children. It is to also provide for the social order, to put people into their appropriate slots. And it is also stated, or sometimes unstated, that it is to make you a part of the citizenry, right? Then we have the family systems. And the reason I consider family so public is because many of us, even though we have all of these things happen in the interiors of our family, we recognize that the family systems are not going to be enough and they have to have an interface with the public. So the family system is a system that is meant to teach you a whole host of things in order to make you be able to operate in society. So it teaches you how to socialize. The family system is also largely for reproduction, more of you, and for the full continuation of society. But these value systems are going to influence the way we are treated. So in sociology, we talk a lot about our mores and our values. And I want to really keen in on this point for you before I continue on, is that when we think of mores, which we call morals, right, they're really norms and customs from generally accepted practices. I want you to hear that generally. I'm going to come back to that. And then values are really about standards of social behavior. And they're understood as like social facts, like, this is what you do when you meet people. You shake their hands, you look into their eyes, right? And the social context is the context in which you're really rare. But values are also culturally specific. Now, when I say culture, I am thinking in the broad, think American, big A, American culture, not so much our kind of subcultures, African American culture, Hispanic culture, Italian culture, et cetera, generally accepted. So these systems are not only developing norms and customs, but they're also developing standards. Now, what is interesting about standards is that standards allow you to tell whether or not somebody has deviated from it. So one of the things about normalization is that normalization is to make assessments about the deviance so that you can derive punishment. All right, so we're going to come back to that. So in my work, I spent a lot of time thinking about the people who the norms and the customs may not work for, where they're not just Black, not just racialized, and they're not just a girl. They're both Black and girl in every moment, right? And this intersectional identity, you might have heard it, Kimberly Crenshaw, a whole host of people, Higginbotham, and others who've really talked about it. So the interesting thing about Black girls is that we sometimes talk about them as if they're just their gender. And sometimes, rarely, we talk about them as if they're race, but they're all those things at the same time. They're right there in the crossroads. So sometimes there's a great disdain for Black men, and people choose, or boys, and then they choose Black girls. So the intersections are both advantages and disadvantages. Other times, people really want a white woman or girl, and so there's a disadvantage. But remember, regardless of what is happening, Black girls, like many of us, have intersectional identities. Notice I haven't talked about ability. I haven't talked about ability of all sorts, physical, neurological abilities, economic class. All of those things are advantages and disadvantages. But for today, we're going to focus on this intersection of race and gender. Now, the thing that is particularly important for us to really hone in on is that racism is both gendered, right? And gender is racialized, right? So all the Blacks are men and all the girls are white. That is often the place where we find ourselves. When we're talking about white people, sometimes we're talking about white men. A lot of the times we're talking about, right, white women, right? So these are the kinds of things. So I want to make sure that we have some understanding of these terminologies. There are people we call white. In the United States, we have 5 racial categories, which is sometimes a little bit sticky for folks, right? We have Black / African American, we have white, non-Hispanic, right? We have Asian, we have Native, and we have Pacific Islanders. 5 races. Now, those 5 races are things we made up. Race is not biological. I know Black folks sometimes really want that. They're like, Black folks are just different. We just made different, right? But racial categories are something that the good white folks really made up, and they made it up in order to put people in categories, right? So there is white in terms of where we're thinking about people's phenotype, how they look. Do they look white? Could they pass for white, right? This is not insignificant in terms of their health and well-being, right? And then there's whiteness. Whiteness is different from white. Whiteness is really about power. It is specifically tied to power and privilege, and the idea that everything should be normed towards those who are perceived as white. I hope that that's clear. We can come back to it, and I hope you're asking me questions in the chat. Then there is Black. People who phenotypically, we've decided that their skin color is a certain thing and that they look Black. But Blackness is about a culturally accepted ways of which we agree that people are, and we call those people Black. Then there is Black, again, phenotype, right? And then there is African, right? People who identify with their ancestral homes, right? Now, some of those people could look white, right? Because you have to think about the fact that the beginning of life started on the continent of Africa, right? So we have people who phenotypically look Black, but they're people who we would call African, right? Because they're tying their identity to their nationalistic home. Then we have this now seemingly complex term of who's a girl and who's a boy. Some people are born, right? And their sex is female, but they live as a boy, right? And then there are people whose sex, their biology is male, but they live as a girl. So these things, girlness and boyness, are actually very social. So we move from the science to the lived experience. Similarly, there are a set of attributes, right? Ways of being that we say are feminine ways of being. Sometimes we think of it as caring. Sometimes we think of it as dimples. Sometimes we think of it as a gentle touch, and we call those things feminine. And then there are things that we call masculine, maybe muscles, maybe the tone in somebody's voice, maybe their attitude towards power, right? So in each of these places, what we're recognizing is that race does not equal Black. Race is about categories, and it is categories that we move from the ancestral realm, the place that we're born, and we bring it into the social realm. So race is created. It takes the natural and unnaturalizes it. It says, yes, you were born in Georgia. And we say, well, but you look like a person who's Black. You look like a person who's white. And you could be a person who's Black and a person who's white, but you could be Black and embrace whiteness and see white as the norm. And then you could be a white person who doesn't subscribe to that, right? Similarly, sex is our biology, but gender is our lived experience. So a Black girl is a person who we phenotypically see and agree that that person is Black, and also agree that they look like a girl. But that agreement is being made in the public space. And whether or not, right, you're in family or in education, if you are perceived as Black and girl at the same time, you are going to be subject to a whole host of disadvantages that people don't like to talk about. So today I'm going to talk about them, right? So here's what we know about some of these disadvantages. We know that Black girls are 6 times more likely to be expelled from school, 3 times more likely to be suspended, and 4 times more likely to be arrested than people who are perceived to be white girls. And this is according to the Department of Education. We also know as early as preschool that Black girls, making up just about 20% of enrollment, are still 54% more likely to be suspended. Now, this is preschool, y'all, right? So in Colorado, we know that education, as much as it is oppressive, right, is also an opportunity. That those of us who get educated over time are able to reap some of the advantages. So in states like Colorado, Maryland, Georgia, Massachusetts, and Virginia, Black women have educational attainment rates that exceed 40%. Now that's still significantly lower than white women, but these inroads have benefits. They also have disadvantages. Luckily, if you live in West Virginia, anybody here from West Virginia? You know it is the only state in the union where Black women are more educated, formally educated, than white women. Big up to West Virginia. Now, as much as we have the educational system as a site of oppression, we also have family as a site of oppression. And families have a way of doing a whole host of things. So Black girls are typically born in Black families. And Black families, for all the loving and support, tend to do a core and major damage around the adultification of Black girls. You know she grown. She look grown though, Why is she dressed like that? So adultification is a primary oppressive tool in Black families for Black girls. It often means that Black girls receive less protection and also more punishment. And that adultification is extended in the public domain as well, right? Especially if a young girl is overweight, she no longer gets picked up, she's no longer treated as if she is in need of protection. If a young lady has a bottom that is considered outside of that norm, that's that whiteness norm, then it becomes problematic. So also if she's big and tall, right? I'm 5'10", right? So assuming that children can take on adult-like traits and responsibility, like you're big enough, you can take care of your brother and sister. You're big enough, you can cook on the stove. You're big enough, you can take care of that, right? So adultification happens in Black families. And young people who are adultified really early have a higher level of stress and social psychological strain. This does not go away, y'all, right? You all know the brazen and the together Black girl who has it all the way together and has always had it all the way together. That young girl, by the time she's 40, is really primed for hypertension. She's really primed for heart disease. She's probably even primed for hip replacement and knee replacement. So how can we move out of these oppressive spaces? You're hearing a lot of language at the conference and in other places that says one of the ways that we can move out of these spaces is that we should be anti-racist, right? We're addressing racism. We don't say anti-sexist. We don't say anti-intersectionalist. We don't, like, whatever the case may be, right? We focus in, we're like, racism is a bigger problem than sexism. Well, what would that mean for a Black girl? If you really want to protect me and put a bunch of protections in so that I'm not racially profiled, what are you going to do about the fact that in this society, people who are identified as women or girls are more subject to violence than the people who are identified as men? So you attack racism, right? So a person who's anti-racist, right, opposes racism and promotes racial tolerance, right? That's the anti-racist. Then there is the abolitionist. You're hearing a lot of that language lately. A person who favors the abolition or the practice of capital punishment, formerly used, especially when we had formalized enslavement up until 1865. And then we have a bunch of activists, a person who campaigns to bring about social change. They're out there. People sometimes refer to me as an activist, always saying something, want something to change, right? And then we have freedom fighters, less used in the US context, but it's a person who takes part in a violent struggle to achieve a political goal. So the suggestion is, if the system is oppressive and we take an anti-racist approach, then it doesn't really tackle racism. It doesn't tackle the system or any of these public systems that gave rise to it. If we are an abolitionist, right, then we want some institutional change, but it really is, the institutional change is really about punishment. If we are an activist, we want to campaign to bring around the change. And if we're a freedom fighter, we have a goal. So perhaps we want to be all of these things. We want to be able to push back on racism, because racism is not about niceness. Racism is about institutional infrastructure that are webbed together like a spider's web, right? Abolitionist work is about reducing that level of punishment. Activist work is about engendering and mobilizing people, and freedom fighting is about, like, how can we make this politically salient? You can decide. For me, my work and the work that I'm going to ask you to do is to take from these, but to move to this other place we call freedom, this other place we call joy. And so this is my work. So my work thinks about how we're going to get those people, the most vulnerable population that I study, Black girls, to feel a sense of joy so that they can galvanize and they can change systems, create political goals, but also be healthy, so that the process of trying to save us does not harm them, does not destroy them. So in my book, right? And my book is called Parent Like It Matters, How to Raise Joyful Change-Making Girls. I really outline that often when we think about the activist, the freedom fighter, the abolitionist, the anti-racist, is these people are grumpy as hell, sad, high blood pressure, disaffected, and at the heart of them, not optimistic. They're working, but they're not well. And the absence of wellness makes them ill-equipped to create sustainable change. So I define joyfulness as a choice to exist and act in a kind of enlightened state beyond the immediate. So we have some immediate crises affecting Black people across the globe. We certainly have this situation as it relates to Haiti. We're angered by all of it, right? And the question is, can we take an enlightened state beyond this immediate moment to think and learn, right? I argue that we can, that joy is about the attitudes that we bring, right, and have towards life. It is largely about being linked to action, that we can do things, that we can connect ourselves to those who are not near us. And it is very much about writing and rewriting the very nature to which we're born and the spaces that we've been in, the public spaces, the family spaces. But it requires a kind of attitude that is about appreciating life and connecting to those around us in allowing us to be able to act and think about issues of equity. So equity is quite different because equity, it means that we have to consider the history of a person and a community, as well as the likelihood that the allocation of resources will be dependent on the history. So if I am tall and you all have seen this image and I have to look over the fence, I may not need anything. And a person who is short and has to look over the fence, you might give them something that reaches my height. And this may seem like equity, but the problem is the fence. The problem isn't that you now just give me the short person a box. We are both held captive to the idea of offense. So in a joyful framework, what we are doing is linking our action to destroy the fence so that we can roam freely. So this is the work that I do with Black girls. I try to get them to think about joyfulness. And that means that they have to pay attention to their self-esteem, what you all call confidence, and think about how to use that esteem to move towards efficacy. So Black girls, regardless of what you might be hearing on the popular news or in conversation, Black girls on average, when social scientists examine, are not so disaffected that they have problematic self-esteem. But Black girls have problematic self-efficacy. So on average, Black girls feel like, yeah, I'm all right. I can do it. I got swag. I can do a bunch of stuff, right? That has to do with me. But when you ask Black girls, do you feel like you can change the rules of the game? Do you think that you could influence your community? Do you think that you could influence your school? Do you think you could change something? That's where the challenge arises, right? Because the power is only centralized in the self. And because of the cultural markers that we've been sent, especially about exceptionalism and uniqueness, the idea is that focus on yourself. But if we focus on ourselves only and we can't feel like we can exact change outside of us, then we don't create new institutional frameworks. So in my work, you heard the introduction of my daughter. My daughter has a campaign called the 1000 Black Girl Books campaign. You might see some of her work on Netflix and the show Bookmarks. I want to talk a little bit about the campaign, not the girl, but I think it's important, right? Is that she is one of over hundreds of girls that I've trained to think about ways in which you can undermine oppressive institutional rules. And her campaign is not just a campaign about collecting books, 1,000 books, she's collected 13,000 books, but it is about thinking about these systematic glitches that occur, right? One of the major systematic issues is the affordability of books. So collect books and give books away, address that. We have an online free database, increase access, not just for those who need to see themselves, but access for those who had never even considered Black girls. Then it is about addressing the values, because public systems are valued, right? How do you change the hearts and minds of people? You engage them, you put Black girls in front of them, you begin to talk to them about the fact that they love their mama like you love your mama, right? And then you must act both locally and globally. Because in order to sustain our work and in order to think about systemic changes, one has to think about how this work will live so that the entire framework can be redone. So this is the kind of framework in which I want to be able to talk to you today. And I'm hoping that there's a lot of questions about how we can reimagine the intersections of Black and girl. Thank you. All right. So that is me, and that is my presentation. I hope that that was clear. I didn't talk too fast. I'm so Jamaican. And I know that there are questions. So I want to get
there are, and I'll read them for you so that you can, listen and then maybe, give your response. So the first question is, how can systems use the idea of joyfulness to help create equity?
Yes, whoever asked that question,
that's your girl Tashara.
All right. So the way in which systems can use joyfulness in order to create change is systems can take a public health approach. They can take this public health approach, regardless of the pandemic, that says that individual health and well-being matters. So for example, today in Forbes, there's an article that says empathy is the greatest leadership quality a person can have. So we need systems to be empathetic to the fact that the significant majority of the society are in a caregiving role, adults, right? So whether or not they have children, and when their workplace is hostile, the research shows that they actually exact really harsh parenting. So systems took a public health approach to realize that if they invest in their individual workers' sense of well-being, that they will be more connected, be more productive, right? In a capitalist society, that's important, and also simultaneously produce workers who would be more productive. So they can do it by really having good systems that take care of wellness. So they need mental health days. They need to provide sanitary napkins free in all their workplaces. They need a good EAP. They also need a set of policies that consider how they recruit. That if you continue to recruit from your own class, right, then you will get a replication of their own class. And all of the evidence tells us that a racially and economically diverse workplace is more productive. So these are the ways in which the kind of optimism about possibility can lead to action, and then investing in people so that they're connected will also lead to more things. So in that framework of both optimism and action, workplaces, if they adopt a public health approach to their work, can actually use and utilize the principles of joy.
Thank you for that. So public health approach. Making sure that we, you and I were talking earlier about this self-care, and I'm sure we're going to get to that in a little bit. But the other, kind of similar to that, there's a question in the Q&A about your section, and this comes from Maria Searcy. I was telling you about her and how such a fan she is of you in the book. She says, I love your section on cultivating gratitude, encourages generosity, strengthens social bond, and acknowledges another good deed. Can you talk about gratitude in your work?
Yes. So thank you so much. And I am quite grateful. So at the heart of my book, I really focus on gratitude, because gratitude allows for a whole set of things. It's the most used word in the book. And when we think about this principle of gratitude, it is not comparative. Oftentimes, when we're talking about gratitude currently, we say, well, there, but for the grace of God, go I, right? And that framework often means like their life sucks. Aren't you glad that your life don't suck as much as theirs? But that is not what I would like you to do. I would like you to think about ways of thinking about your blessings, where you start, and what you have to offer. Because gratitude is quite infectious, right? Is that when we have a gratefulness, then we want to extend that We want to volunteer. We want to give of ourselves. We want people to have the thing we have. Like, we have so much of it that we want them to have it too. And so this notion of gratitude allows us to be connected to people, because it is connection how action happens. It's how you build self-efficacy. You want to change something? You can't do it alone. Somebody says, you know, you're a leader if people follow you. But if you are just doing something and no one's following you, you're just walking alone. You're not leading anything. So gratitude has this multiplicative effect of not only inspiring you to do, but also inspiring you to connect and then inspiring action. And so it is important for us each day that we take stock of those things that we have for which we are grateful. Because we, despite our diminished position as racialized people in the United States, in our own individual spaces, we have advantages for which we should be grateful. I am able to see you today. I did nothing to earn my sight. I am able to stand today. I did nothing to earn my ability to walk. I should remain grateful for that. And I should think about how both my sight and my ability to walk is something that I can use to help make the world a better place. It is as simple as that. But if we don't take stock of the things for which we are grateful, then we also miss the advantages that we have. And why this is important is because we know many people, especially those who are marked as white, cannot make sense of the advantage of whiteness, because they earned nothing to be white, but it is afforded them an extreme advantage, right? I did nothing to be able to see, but it has afforded me an extreme advantage. So I would want us to be able to take stock of our advantages and to think about how to utilize those advantages in order to create a more equitable world. And we can do that even though we're Black, right? So gratitude centralizes us.
It sure does. And I'm sitting here just like, wow, because you are expressing something that I have felt and I feel about many people in this webinar, and especially the 15 awardees that we honor on Wednesday, because that is truly what I feel, the gratitude of the work that they do within their own individual circles, but with Black Girls Equity Alliance. And if it was not for them, a lot of the success that we have had would not be. You know, people see me as the leader, but truly it is the gratitude of, you know, me having for them that is moving this thing along. So I'm so grateful, as well as my own staff at Gwen's Girl. So yeah, I'm just in awe of the, you know, just your response. So thank you.
It's my pleasure.
So another question, you use the phrase change making girls in the title of your book. This was very similar to what we heard this morning from Nikel Thomas about her daughter, Taylor. What advice do you have for parents who want to raise change-making girls in the face of competing forms of oppression? And we could talk about social media. We could talk about all the different things. This morning, we talked about, you know, the bullying that happened to Taylor. There's all these different negative things that our children face. So what's your, you know, kind of advice?
So I wrote a whole book with a bunch of advice, but I will tell you, and you should definitely get the book. Somebody should say something about the book, is that, but my central advice is you cannot raise a joyful change-making girl unless you are joyful change-making caregiver. That's my biggest advice. So you have to focus on your own joy so that your children can see you be joyful. They can see you be optimistic and engage in action. And you have to work on your own change making and working alongside. That's what, you know, that was the introduction, working alongside with you. Then they have models. So a part of the challenge of the historical insult of enslavement to African people across the globe is that we have not had a lot of opportunities to always be right, alongside our children. Our families have been disrupted by the institutional systems of oppression. But a part of what is important for us is that we know that and want our children to do better than us. And we tell them to get to the top of the ladder. But we do not help them on each of these steps. As it relates to change making, this is an opportunity for each of those steps to be built together. So if you want a joyful change making girl, you need to get to the business of being a joyful change making caregiver.
And so at Glenn's Girls, we also talk about the parallel process and just how we equate not even just parenting, but even the work as the adult or the mentor in their life. And I think that that's the same thing too, that, you know, we have to be striving to be joyful in what we do and how we, you know, show up in the spaces if we're working with girls and want them to be joyful.
Yes. And that often means stuff like, you need to eat your vegetables. You know, you need to get up and be outside. You need to make sure that you're a good friend. You need to make sure that you say something to your teacher, right? So if those things are true, right? If children need to move and exercise and have healthy relationships and not ruminate about things, and they need to make sure that, you know, the systems in which controls their lives, their bad school lunches, oppressive teachers, et cetera, they need to push back. You have coworkers, you have those things. How are you demonstrating through your own life, through actually modeling? And are you narrating so that they know? Because osmosis, it's not going to happen. So you need to engage in them. So you can tell your child to be a good friend, and then you're on the phone and not being a good friend. They're overhearing those things. So whatever it is that you want for your children, be it.
Right.
Be it. Right. If you want them not to always be on their phone, I know you're busy though. If you want them to use social media responsibly, you might want to learn how to text and how to use emojis, right? You may want to get into that. Like whatever it is that you want them to do, you gonna really have to be it, not just say it. Them old days are gone. You gotta actually be it.
That old adage, practice what you preach. Listen.
And it's hard because
it is.
Black women are not sleeping, are not resting. And then we're raising children who we're mad at that are staying up late in order to finish their homework, and that are given all of their time to school, or who get upset about things in irrational ways. I want us to really think about, if our children were doing what we were doing, would we be pleased? We need to be okay for them to be okay.
That's great insight. Thank you. Yes. So the next question, how have you impacted curriculum in grade schools or in your personal experience, or did you merely supplement the limitations of the schools?
So some of my work has been using curriculum, but I don't do curriculum writing. So in North Carolina, for example, a big influence was on the science curriculum, because I'm deeply concerned that we are biologizing race and biologizing gender, and that children are not learning that there are no chromosomal differences between people we call white and people who we call Black, and that we have in fact created an unnatural system around that. Similarly, around the issues of gender. And also I've been successful in working with Bennett College in trying to get curriculum to actually think about health and well-being as a part of a science class. In New Jersey and in Philadelphia, it has mostly been through a summer leadership program and some initiatives. So, for example, this week, you see I'm wearing green. It is the last day of Green Ribbon Week, which is a focus on mental health. So that's been adopted by the school district. And so for the entire week of second week in September, youth are learning about mental health. They're learning about the social and biological reasons why some children are unhealthy, and also everybody's wearing green and practicing to both listen and breathe. But our work primarily is supplemental out of school curriculum, which takes place in the summer and then runs throughout the year.
Thank you. How do we translate bring joyfulness into our social messaging?
Oh, great. Okay. So there are a couple of different ways. If you're a social media user, right? The way I think about social media is that you do it, you live it, and you document it. You don't create for it. And that approach allows people to be able to kind of understand both your challenges and your successes. So you live your life, you take stock, you're grateful, you face challenges, and you try to work through them. And a part of joyfulness is this wealth of optimism about what is possible. You need to cultivate that wealth. That kind of well of optimism for me comes from a combination of therapeutic support, really good friends, right? So I just spent the last weekend with my middle school friends who I've known since for 35 years, really documenting those connections and showing and emanating what is true about your life, and using your public influence to be able to demonstrate that you are living optimistically and that you're actively engaged. So social media to me is such a useful tool for documentation of the lived experience, that nothing is created for it, that your life is created and you document it. And that is one of the things I think it's really important. A crucial part of bringing it into your real life, and I will say this because I've said this now several times, is you must find a way to attend to your physical and mental health. It is an impossibility that you can really be a great leader, mother leader, family leader, right? Social change leader if you're unhealthy. And I will say this, and this is probably the harshest thing I will say, is that if MLK was alive, he'd probably be on dialysis, right? And if Malcolm X was alive, he would probably have already had a heart attack. Is that so many of our own leaders are unwell. They're raging. And you have phrases like Brittany Cooper's eloquent rage, right? But if you were talking to a psychologist who talking to you about the DSM-4, that level of sustained rage is not good for us. We really have to find ways to have a kind of internal tranquility. We need to attend, and this is why the public health framework, we have to attend to individual health, but we also need an approach that recognizes that our own individual health is a part of our public and community health. And we need our children to have that kind of harmony inside in order to have justice. So in the book, I describe harmony, right? Internal joy is harmony. External joy is justice. And we need that. So we have to cultivate. We begin with the inside and work our way out.
Powerful. I see in the chat, also going back to the social media, it says social media can help to fight the negative narrative surrounding our girls. Just seeing more girls' joy can help resist the adultification bias. And just want to shout out and put in space our sister and friend, Dr. Jamelia Blake, who has been instrumental in bringing this forward for Black girls and the issues around adultification bias.
It's really quite problematic. And it's, I really just equate to that issue because when I came to the US, like in my family, I'm the shortest person, I'm 5'10". My daughter's already 5'10". And when we're at the airport or in certain spaces, people are just like, well, she can go by herself. And that's, she's been 5'10" since she was 11 years old. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, no, she cannot. She deserves a protection. She needs to have her mother. She needs to have her father. She needs to have her auntie, right? And there are all these like little insidious ways. People sometimes will write on Facebook, like I have a beef with one major leader who called my child a grown woman. And I'm like, sis, she's at the point she was 13. No, she ain't a grown woman. Okay. She just tall. And these little things, these phrases like she grown, she big, she can take care of herself, right? These things, they're insidious.
Mhm.
And they really end up infecting a bunch of thoughts about us, right? And we sometimes are complicit in that. But what I always say, it's like the fence. We didn't create the fence, but it is our job to remove it,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. So I don't see Tashara, she's starting. She know how you get too. She gonna say, who said it? I'm about to pull up. So Tashara, don't get her
Yo,
started.
I was in my feelings. I was like, ah, don't call my baby grown. My baby is not grown. My baby's tall,
Mhm.
right?
And she your
And
baby.
and she's my big, and also, I mean, this is also related, right? Because we know that in Black families, there's a lot of management of Black girls' bodies, right? Some of you put panties under your child's bathing suit and leotards, right? That ain't because of the child. That is because you're really concerned about public perceptions of the child body. But that is taking the structural oppressive system and making it an individual issue, right? And so these kinds of things are all of the part of the adultification practices, right? The body isn't in and of itself sexualized. Y'all know that, right? Like we sexualize it. We project that onto children, right? Now, if you're a mother of a child, you are also deeply concerned because you know the society is violent.
Mhm.
But what I just want us to remind ourselves is that as we're having these conversations with our child, we begin at the place that says, the system is the problem. And I am trying to help to figure out how to keep you safe in a problematic system. You are not the problem. So what
Absolutely.
happens is that comes after the child has protested. But we need to begin with letting our children know where the system is at fault. So one of the things I typically say to people is that if you have been born poor, like I was born color purple poor, right? Like extra, extra poor. And if you've been born poor in the US, likely you maybe lived in a housing development, subsidized housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is that children often are not told that that level of poverty is racism in action. It ain't because your mama's lazy, your daddy's lazy, or whatever. It is how racism looks in action, poverty. So this thing that your family is negotiating is a negotiation of racism in action. It's a negotiation of sexism in action, right? Because we know who are the poorest. They're Black women with children. So children need to know that super early so they can identify that it isn't because my mama didn't work hard enough, she didn't finish this, is that this is a systems issue that is affecting us as individuals. And we have to have a set of mechanism in place, joy being one, to push back at that. But too often we take these narratives and we make it an individual failing. And that's how anti-Blackness breeds. When we take the systems error, internalize it, and then spread it to suggest that there is some problem with people who also share our phenotype.
Right. So yeah, that's just exactly what we have been addressing and has been the foundation of what we're doing within the Black Girls Equity Alliance. Sarah Goodkind often says, we need to focus more on how, not just the girl, but fixing the system, not fixing the girl. So
yeah, and pointing it out. I mean, my child has a joke. She was like, "Mommy's gonna say, look at racism, look at it, look at it." Like you want the kids to know this is racism operating here. The question that Kamara Jones asked is that you should always ask the question, how is racism operating here? And it really helps when kids can begin to see like, oh, the reason why that neighborhood trash is picked up and that one's not, oh, that's just racism in action, right? They need to see it, because if they don't start seeing systems, then they'll be inclined to blame themselves. and you already know that that's going to have really deleterious health effects, right? And that is where the self-esteem problem happens, right? So like, if you think that you're at fault all the time, then it is very, very challenging for you to feel confident. And it is more challenging for you to think that you can change anything.
Yes, and then just going back to the intersectional influence of being Black and, you know, a girl or a woman. So here's a question that kind of resonates, or, you know, kind of brings it all home. I'm a white woman raising a Black daughter and working with Black girls. What are some things I need to do to create a powerful and healthy space?
Okay, lovely. So white individual agency, like Black individual agency matters, right? Is that as an individual actor and a caregiver of a child who has to negotiate a hostile society, I would say one of the key things that I recommend for all persons, and this is not just specific, is that it is very difficult to think about systemic issues if you're grossly underinformed about the history of Indigenous Black people in the United States. And I say this because much of what is being touted right now in the media space is that because I'm Black, I know. But no, right? Is that Blackness is a lived experience, but it doesn't make you informed about systems. It doesn't necessarily make you informed, right? So I think the fact that you are raising a Black child, whatever the Black child's ancestry or ethnicity is that it's really important to get really keen about Black Indigenous American history. Why? Because that history shapes how even someone like me, an immigrant, is able to interact and move around the space. It gives you institutional insights that are going to affect your parenting. The second is that you already know clearly, because you're working with Black girls, the value of connections. So when I say connections, especially as a white person leading, being a mother leader in the household, is that that child needs to be able to see multiple forms of whiteness, not just yours. So yours may be pious and beautiful, and they may misinterpret that whites are pious and beautiful. And that is the same also for Black parents. That Black parents make the mistake of thinking and saying stuff to Black children that assumes that all Black people are great. And then when Black children experience other Black people who are crappy, they're like, what happened? But you're Black though, right? So it's really important that your child experiences lots of different versions of whiteness and simultaneously lots of different versions of Blackness. And so the task for you, because if you are in a Black on Black family, they're going to experience whiteness in a country that's 72% white. But you now have to make a particular effort, right, to make sure that your child understands the distinction between individual presentations of white and of whiteness, similar to a child who was in an all Black space. And it is critically important that you, as a white person, is not overindulgent in whiteness, right? And that is as important as Black people who may overindulge in whiteness as well, which is to believe that white is the norm and everything else is deviant. So I think that the task is not so overwhelming, except for the fact that your Black child needs to be around white people as much as they need to be around people of other races and a variation of those people. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. And I just want to add that Gwen's Girls, that was kind of the same reason why we partnered with Dr. Venus Evans Winters to give us some sessions on what she calls the front porch. And it took us all the way back to just the beginning of like how Black people ended up in this United States of America and our plight ever since. And so I encourage people to, as you said, no matter if you're Black or white, to really learn more about Black history, African history, African American history, because many of us, we didn't learn it in school and they're not teaching it in school. And now we had a conversation yesterday that Dr. V kind of moderated around how they really now don't want to have this conversation. So we have to educate ourselves and educate our young people about, about our history. So
it's
thank
really
you for that
critical.
question. All right, I think we have a few more minutes for one more question. And I know you can answer this. You haven't answered this because I know you and Marley are doing things globally. How have you worked globally? What should keep wait a minute, what should we know about the global community engagement with these issues?
Okay, so we work a lot in Jamaica, Ghana, and Haiti. I'm from Jamaica. I'm from a really small place that looked like time forgot. And I think the global issues are fairly similar. There are some historical contexts that are different. So Jamaica is now 89% people of African ancestry. And so that is different from the United States. Jamaica is also only 3 million people, and the United States is 334 million people. So there is a difference in comparison there. And it's important to know, but colorism, the saliency and the incessant problem of colorism lives across the globe. It lives in Jamaica, it lives in Ghana, right? And it certainly has a strong foothold here in the United States. Adultification is also rampant across the globe because, again, America has a great import and export system of bigotry, right? And institutional inequality. They probably exported as much as McDonald's or jeans, right? And so across the globe, America has infected the globe. Certainly they weren't the first to infect the globe. Europe did that, but America has really done a bang up job of infecting the globe. If you just even look at Hawaii and the increased obesity rate with not only SPAM, but 90210. Researchers have really looked at that, about how American cultural practices have made its way. So a part of the reason why we work in those spaces is we work there around two core issues of literacy. So Marley's campaign really has a hallmark of wanting to have windows and mirrors. We want to be able to give people who are not Indigenous and Black and don't have this particular intersectional identity, we want them to be able to have an insight in the fact that there's no one way to be a Black girl. Like if you're a Black and a girl, any way you are is the way Black girls are, right? And that there isn't some kind of essential Blackness. This is quite important for us, right? And it's quite important, it should be for important. There is no pure Blackness, like that ain't Black though, right? There's no way of being Black except for the fact that you live it. It's the structural inequalities that make Blackness present itself in some really common ways. So that is the mirror, the window part. The mirror part is so that Black girls themselves can see themselves as worthy, full, agentic human beings, right? So we try to do that in Jamaica. Most of the books do not have Black people. Same for Ghana, right? So it's not just a US problem. It is a global problem that stories of people who are of African descent, who phenotypically look Black, are simply underrepresented. Then the other issue that we work with across the globe is the End Period Poverty campaign. So for girls who are economically disadvantaged, they will miss up to 3 months of school because of their period. Now that's a biological condition meeting a social inequity, right? So not all menstruators are girls, but most menstruators are people who look like girls. And what happens is that because we have, in the United States, we have 22 states that have a luxury tax that will tax you for having a period, and you have to pay. There's no tax on condoms, but they're taxed on tampons, and tampons and pads are only one part of the period. You have panties, you have painkillers, you have a whole host of things that happen in a period. So girls don't go to school when they have their period if they're economically disadvantaged. Simultaneously, those are the same girls who probably qualify for free and reduced lunch. So in Ghana, in Jamaica, all across the US, we have this inequity. So Grassroots, right, the organization that I run, we do this work of trying to bring all these pieces together across the globe. In Haiti, we know that Haiti is in a challenging situation, right? And the conditions of Haiti are much more complex than are presented in the news. So we went to Haiti in 2019 to deliver goods and services to those folks in the rural area. Because oftentimes when challenges occur, we pay attention to the cities and we forget those places that time forgot, right? And so we are now launching a project that is going to take care of that, because Haiti has an environmental problem like all of the globe, but because the water is contaminated in Haiti, girls who have periods are using that water and developing a lot of UTIs. Men and women who are walking in that water, which means they're having a lot of fungal infections and are becoming amputated. But they're not going to come to the attention when we're talking about borders, right? And Haiti has 11 million people, right? It isn't as small as Jamaica, and Ghana has 60. So these are the kinds of work that what we want to do is really be able to get people on the ground to begin to have conversations. And we also have to provide emergency care as we do that. So those are some of the things that we're doing across the globe right now.
Thank you. I applaud you and your foundation. So we're at time. I want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. For those, I believe everybody should have gotten the book. If you still want a copy, please email me. Thank you, Dr. Johnson Diaz, for all that you have been doing and for being with us today. Can everybody help us to thank her?
Hey, y'all. Thank you. Thank you so much. I have really enjoyed it. I hope we will get to be in person. We're going to see who can do the best logo.
You got to come back. You got to come back. We're going to have you in person next year. So.